The morning was grey and heavy with rain as the small church in Fairhaven filled with mourners. The air was thick with sorrow, and the sound of weeping mixed with the distant rumble of thunder. Father Daniel, a respected figure in the community, stood at the altar, his solemn voice carrying over the congregation as he led the funeral service for Claire, a beloved woman who had dedicated her life to helping others. But amid the quiet reverence, a sudden bark shattered the stillness. All eyes turned to the front of the church, where a scruffy dog sat at the base of Claire's coffin, barking insistently. "What's wrong with that dog?" An older man whispered to his wife. "I don't know," she replied, her voice trembling. "But it's as if he's trying to tell us something." The dog, named Jack, had been Claire's faithful companion for years. Everyone in Fairhaven knew how inseparable the two had been. Jack had followed Claire everywhere, his loyalty earning him a place in the hearts of the townsfolk. But now, his persistent barking seemed out of place, almost as if he were protesting the ceremony itself. Father Daniel paused in his prayer, his brow furrowing. "Jack," he said softly, stepping toward the dog. "It's all right. Claire is at peace now." But Jack didn't stop. He barked louder, his eyes fixed on the coffin as if it held a secret only he could see. The congregation exchanged uneasy glances, their grief giving way to curiosity and discomfort. Seated near the back of the church was Michael, a young man new to Fairhaven. He had come to pay his respects after hearing about Claire's passing, though he hadn't known her well. Something about Jack's behavior unsettled him, and as he watched the dog, a gnawing feeling grew in his chest. Michael leaned toward the man beside him. "Does Jack always act like this?" he asked. The man shook his head. "Never. He's the calmest dog I've ever seen. This is strange." Michael's gaze shifted back to Jack. The dog's bark had taken on a desperate tone, and for a moment, Michael thought he saw something flicker in the priest's expression: unease. Perhaps even fear. Unable to sit still, Michael rose to his feet. "Father Daniel," he said, his voice firm but respectful. "Maybe Jack is trying to tell us something." The congregation fell silent, their eyes darting between Michael and the priest. Father Daniel's face tightened, and he forced a smile. "It's just a dog, my son," he said, his voice steady. "Please, let us continue the service." Michael hesitated, his instincts telling him there was more to Jack's behavior than met the eye. The dog's barking grew more insistent, his tail wagging nervously as he scratched at the floor near the coffin. "Father," Michael pressed, stepping closer, "I think we should at least see what's bothering him." Claire loved Jack. She trusted him. The room buzzed with whispers, the tension thickening as Father Daniel's calm demeanor began to crack. Beads of sweat formed on his brow, and his hand trembled slightly as he raised it to silence the crowd. "This is a sacred ceremony," Father Daniel said sharply. "We will not disrupt it." But Michael wasn't convinced. He crouched beside Jack, his hand brushing the dog's scruffy fur. "What is it, boy?" he murmured. "What are you trying to tell us?" Jack barked once more, then looked directly at Michael, his amber eyes filled with urgency. Without waiting for permission, Michael placed a hand on the edge of the coffin. "I'm sorry, Father," he said, his voice steady. "But I have to know." The congregation gasped as Michael lifted the lid of the coffin slightly. Jack growled low, his body tense as if guarding a treasure or a secret. Michael's breath caught as the interior of the coffin came into view. The mourners leaned forward, their curiosity overcoming their hesitation. "What is it?" someone whispered. Michael's face paled. "There's something here," he said, his voice barely audible. "Something that doesn't belong." Father Daniel stepped forward, his voice rising. "Close the coffin. This is sacrilege." But Michael ignored him, lifting the lid higher to reveal what lay inside. The room erupted into gasps and murmurs as the truth began to unfold. The church fell into stunned silence as Michael carefully lifted the coffin's lid. Inside, nestled against Claire's peaceful form, was a small bundle wrapped in a tattered cloth. Jack barked sharply, his tail wagging with urgency as Michael reached for the bundle. What? What is that? A woman near the front of the congregation stammered, clutching her husband's arm. Michael hesitated before unwrapping the cloth. The gasp that escaped his lips echoed through the church. It was a baby, tiny, fragile, and barely moving, its faint cries breaking the tense silence. The congregation erupted into chaos. People rose from their seats, their voices a mixture of confusion and disbelief. A baby? In a coffin? One man exclaimed, his voice rising above the din. How is that possible? Father Daniel stepped forward, his face pale and his composure slipping. This is impossible, he stammered. There must be some mistake. Michael cradled the baby gently, his heart pounding. This isn't a mistake, he said firmly. Jack's been trying to tell us the whole time. Jack barked again, his tail wagging as he stood beside Michael, his gaze fixed on the infant. It was clear to everyone in the room that the dog had been protecting the baby, guarding it with the same loyalty he had shown Claire. Lisa, an elderly woman who had been Claire's closest friend, stepped forward. Her hands trembling. Claire never mentioned a baby, she said, her voice breaking. But she always had a way of helping those in need. Father Daniel shook his head, his voice rising in protest. This child cannot have been in the coffin. I oversaw the arrangements myself. This must be some sort of trick. Michael shot him a sharp look. A trick? Look at the dog, Father. Look at this child. Does this look like a trick to you? The baby let out a weak cry, its tiny fingers clutching at Michael's shirt. He looked down at the child, his chest tightening. This baby needs help, he said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. We need to get them to a hospital. Jack barked again, his body pressing against Michael's leg as if urging him to act quickly. Lisa nodded, her face etched with concern. I'll come with you, she said. Claire would have wanted us to protect this child. The crowd began to disperse, murmuring in hushed tones as Michael, Lisa, and Jack hurried out of the church with the baby. Father Daniel remained at the altar, his hands gripping the edge of the pulpit as though to steady himself. This can't be happening, he whispered to himself. But as the echoes of the congregation's whispers faded, the truth of what had unfolded was undeniable. At the hospital, doctors rushed to care for the baby, their expressions a mix of urgency and amazement. It's a miracle this child survived, one nurse said, her voice tinged with disbelief. Who found them? Michael gestured to Jack, who sat vigilantly near the hospital bed. It was him, he said simply. He wouldn't stop barking until we listened. As the baby's condition stabilized, Michael and Lisa sat together in the waiting room, the weight of the day pressing heavily on them. Do you think Claire knew about the baby? Michael asked, breaking the silence. Lisa shook her head, her eyes glistening with tears. I don't know. But if she did, she must have been trying to protect them. Claire had a heart as big as the world. She would have done anything to save a life. Michael nodded, his gaze drifting to Jack. And Jack. He knew. He stayed by that coffin to make sure we found the baby. It's like he was carrying out Claire's final wish. The next morning, the baby was declared healthy and stable, but the mystery of how they had ended up in the coffin remained unsolved. Michael and Lisa returned to the church, determined to uncover the truth. Jack followed close behind, his presence a constant reminder of the extraordinary events that had unfolded. Father Daniel, Michael said as they entered the empty sanctuary. We need answers. Someone put that baby in the coffin. Someone knew. Father Daniel turned to face them, his expression weary. You're right, he said quietly. There's more to this than any of us realized. Father Daniel motioned for Michael, Lisa, and Jack to sit in the front pews of the empty church. The air was heavy with tension as he paced near the altar, his usually calm demeanor replaced with visible unease. I don't know how the baby ended up in Claire's coffin, he began, his voice low and measured. But Claire. She was no stranger to secrets. Lisa frowned, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Secrets? What are you talking about, Father? Claire was one of the most honest people I've ever known. Father Daniel hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Claire often came to me for guidance. She was deeply compassionate, always helping those who couldn't help themselves. But in her final weeks, she confided something troubling. She said she was protecting someone in danger. Michael leaned forward, his brow furrowed. Who was she protecting? And how does that connect to the baby? Father Daniel shook his head. She didn't tell me much. Just that it was someone vulnerable, someone who had been abandoned by everyone else. She said she had to keep them safe, no matter the cost. Lisa's eyes filled with tears. Claire would have done anything for someone in need. But to keep this a secret. She must have been afraid. Michael glanced at Jack, who was sitting alert, his gaze fixed on Father Daniel. If Claire was protecting someone, Michael said, then maybe Jack knows more than we do. He was with her until the very end. Father Daniel nodded, his expression softening. Jack's loyalty was unmatched. He wouldn't leave her side, even in death. But the baby. This changes everything. The group decided to search Claire's home, hoping to uncover clues that could explain the connection between her and the baby. The house, a modest cottage on the edge of town, was filled with memories of Claire's life, bookshelves lined with worn novels, photographs of her and Jack, and small trinkets from her travels. Lisa led the way to Claire's bedroom, her voice trembling. If she was hiding something, it might be in here. As they searched, Michael noticed a small locked chest beneath the bed. This looks promising, he said, pulling it into the light. Lisa retrieved a key from Claire's jewelry box, her hands shaking as she handed it to Michael. Go ahead, she whispered. Inside the chest were letters, photographs, and a journal. Michael carefully removed the items, his heart racing as he flipped through the pages. The journal entries were dated only a few weeks before Claire's passing. I've taken in the child, Michael read aloud. They were left in the woods, abandoned like an unwanted burden. I couldn't walk away, not when they needed me. But I fear what may come next. If they find out I have the baby, they'll come for them and for me. Lisa gasped, her hand covering her mouth. She found the baby? In the woods? Who would abandon a child like that? The next entry revealed more. Jack has been my constant guardian, Michael continued. He senses the danger I feel, staying close to the baby at all times. I know I'm taking a risk by keeping them, but I can't let them fall into the wrong hands. Father Daniel, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. Claire must have been afraid of someone who wanted the baby for reasons we can only imagine. Michael nodded, his mind racing. But who? And why go to such lengths to hide the child, even in death? As they continued searching, Lisa found a photograph tucked inside the journal. It showed Claire holding a baby, her smile radiant despite the worry in her eyes. Behind her stood a man, his face partially obscured but familiar. Father, Lisa said, handing him the photo. Do you recognize this man? Father Daniel's expression darkened as he studied the image. Yes, he said quietly. That's Andrew Collins. He used to be a prominent figure in this town, a businessman who dealt in adoption services. Michael frowned. Adoption services? You think he had something to do with this? Father Daniel nodded grimly. Collins left Fairhaven years ago after accusations surfaced about unethical practices. If Claire took in this baby, it's possible she was trying to protect them from him. The revelation cast a new light on Claire's actions. She had risked everything to shield the baby from harm, and in doing so, had created a mystery that would outlive her. Michael set the journal down, his resolve hardening. If Collins is involved, we need to find him. He might be the key to understanding why this baby was abandoned and why Claire was so afraid. Lisa placed a hand on his arm, her voice steady. "Then we'll do whatever it takes to finish what Claire started. For her. And for the baby." Jack barked softly, as if in agreement, his amber eyes reflecting the same determination. Together, they had uncovered part of the truth, but the path ahead was still shrouded in uncertainty. The journey to justice had just begun. The group's investigation appeared to gain momentum as Father Daniel guided them through Claire's journal entries, connecting her actions to a greater scheme. The revelation of Andrew Collins and his past cast a shadow over Claire's sacrifice. But as they delved deeper, small inconsistencies began to emerge: gaps in Father Daniel's recollections, strange omissions in Claire's notes, and the unsettling feeling that their investigation was being subtly redirected. One evening, as Michael reviewed Claire's journal again, something struck him. He noticed that several pages near the end had been torn out. "Lisa," he called, his voice steady but sharp. "Take a look at this." Lisa joined him, frowning as she examined the journal. "The last entries are missing," she murmured. Claire was meticulous. She wouldn't leave her thoughts incomplete. Michael nodded, his jaw tightening. "Exactly. Someone wanted us to miss this." They brought the discovery to Father Daniel the next morning. The priest's face darkened as he glanced at the damaged journal. "Claire entrusted this to you," Michael said, his tone challenging. "Did she say anything about why these pages might be missing?" Father Daniel hesitated, his gaze shifting to the altar. "Claire was under immense pressure," he said carefully. "It's possible she removed them herself to protect someone. Or someone didn't want us to know the whole truth," Lisa countered, her voice firm. The tension in the room was palpable. Jack barked softly, pacing near Claire's coffin as if sensing the unease in the air. The following day, Michael and Lisa revisited Andrew Collins to confront him about the missing pages. Collins, though bitter and defensive, provided a surprising answer. "Claire didn't trust everyone," he said, leaning back in his chair. "She may have seemed like an open book, but she was careful. She suspected someone close to her was involved in all of this." Michael's heart sank. "Who?" Collins shrugged. "She never said. But if you're asking me, I'd look closer to home. She kept things from that priest of yours for a reason." The statement lingered in Michael's mind as they returned to Fairhaven. Father Daniel greeted them at the church, his usual calm demeanor intact. But Michael couldn't shake the doubt Collins's words had sown. That night, while reviewing their findings, Michael voiced his concerns. "Something doesn't add up," he said. "Claire trusted Father Daniel, but not completely. Why would she withhold information from him?" Lisa hesitated, her voice low. "You think he knows more than he's letting on?" Michael nodded. "It's possible. And if he does, we need to find out." Their suspicions deepened when Lisa discovered a hidden compartment in Claire's chest of letters. Inside were fragments of the missing journal pages. The entries revealed Claire's growing fear of betrayal and her suspicion that someone close to her was working with Collins. "I can't trust him," Lisa read aloud, her voice trembling. "He says he wants to help, but I've seen the way he looks at the baby. He knows too much." Michael's stomach twisted. She's talking about Father Daniel. Confronting the priest was a delicate matter. Michael and Lisa returned to the church with Jack, determined to uncover the truth. Father Daniel greeted them warmly, but his demeanor shifted when Michael placed the recovered journal pages on the table. "These were hidden in Claire's house," Michael said. His voice steady. "She wrote about someone she couldn't trust. Someone she suspected was involved in the scheme." "Was it you?" Father Daniel's face tightened. "How dare you accuse me?" he said, his voice rising. "I've dedicated my life to this church, to helping Claire. Why would I betray her?" "Because you were protecting yourself," Lisa interjected, her eyes blazing. "You knew about Collins. You knew about the baby. And you hid them in the coffin to cover your tracks." Jack growled low, his body tense as he stood between the group and the priest. Father Daniel stepped back, his composure faltering. "You don't understand," he said, his voice cracking. "I was trying to protect the church. To protect Claire's memory." Michael's voice was cold. "No, you were protecting your secrets. You used Claire's death to hide the truth." Father Daniel's shoulders slumped, his resistance crumbling. "Yes," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "I knew about the baby. Collins approached me months before Claire found them. He offered money to look the other way." Lisa gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "And Claire?" "She discovered what was happening," Father Daniel continued, his eyes filled with regret. "She confronted me, begged me to help her protect the child. But I was a coward. I thought if I stayed quiet, it would all go away." Michael's fists clenched. "You betrayed her. You betrayed everything she stood for." Father Daniel sank into a chair, his head in his hands. "I didn't want her to die. I didn't know Collins would go that far. When I found the baby, I panicked. I thought if I hid them, no one would ever know." Jack barked sharply, his amber eyes locked on the priest. It was as if the dog understood the weight of Father Daniel's confession. The group left the church in silence, the weight of the truth pressing heavily on their hearts. Father Daniel's betrayal had cost Claire her life, but it had also brought them closer to understanding the depths of her courage. As they prepared to take their findings to the authorities, Michael placed a hand on Jack's head. His voice filled with resolve. "We'll finish this, boy. For Claire. For the baby. And for justice." Jack wagged his tail faintly, his loyalty unwavering. Together, they would ensure that Claire's sacrifice was not in vain. The revelation of Father Daniel's betrayal weighed heavily on Michael, Lisa, and the community of Fairhaven. The priest, who had long been a trusted figure, had not only failed Claire but also concealed the truth for his own protection. The group's mission to bring justice for Claire and the baby now carried an added urgency, not just to expose Andrew Collins, but to hold Father Daniel accountable. Lisa sat in her kitchen, poring over the journal pages they had recovered. Each word felt heavier than the last as she pieced together Claire's growing fear of Father Daniel. "She knew something was wrong," Lisa said, her voice shaking. "She tried to protect the baby, even when she realized she couldn't trust him." Michael nodded, his expression grim. "He didn't just betray Claire, he betrayed all of us. And he's still hiding something. The coffin, the baby. Why go to such extremes to cover his tracks?" Determined to uncover the full extent of Father Daniel's actions, Michael and Lisa decided to confront him one last time, this time with the authorities present. Sheriff Harris, a stern but fair man, agreed to accompany them after reviewing the evidence they had compiled. "Father Daniel's actions go beyond moral failure," Harris said as they prepared to head to the church. "If he colluded with Collins or obstructed justice, he'll face legal consequences." When they arrived at the church, they found Father Daniel sitting alone at the altar, his head bowed in prayer. The once revered figure looked smaller, frailer than they remembered. Jack growled softly, standing protectively beside Lisa. "Father," Michael said firmly, his voice echoing in the empty sanctuary. "We need to talk." Father Daniel looked up, his face pale but resigned. "I suppose you've come for the truth," he said, his voice hollow. "I have nothing left to hide." Under Harris's watchful eye, Father Daniel began his confession. "I thought I could control the situation," he said, his voice trembling. "Collins approached me months ago, offering money to turn a blind eye to his schemes. At first, I refused. But when Claire found the baby, everything unraveled." "What did he want with the baby?" Lisa asked, her voice shaking with emotion. "He saw them as an opportunity," Father Daniel admitted. "A chance to profit through illegal adoption. Claire figured out what he was planning and took the baby to protect them. She begged me to help, but I was too afraid. I told her she was on her own." Lisa's fists clenched. "And when she died, you used her funeral to hide the baby." Father Daniel nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I thought it was the only way to keep them safe. I didn't know what else to do. I failed her." Michael's voice was sharp. "You didn't just fail her. You failed all of us. And you let her sacrifice go unanswered." The weight of Father Daniel's confession sent shockwaves through the community. News of his betrayal spread quickly, and the congregation that had once revered him now looked upon him with a mix of anger and heartbreak. Sheriff Harris moved forward with charges of obstruction of justice and collusion, ensuring that Father Daniel would face the consequences of his actions. As the legal process unfolded, Michael and Lisa turned their focus to ensuring the baby's safety and future. Lisa filed for temporary guardianship, determined to give the child a loving and stable home. Michael, meanwhile, continued working with Sarah, the journalist, to expose Collins's broader network and uncover any lingering secrets. One evening, as Michael sat by the fire with Jack, he reflected on the journey that had brought them here. "We've come so far, boy," he said, scratching Jack behind the ears. "But there's still more to do. Claire's story isn't over." Jack barked softly, his amber eyes filled with understanding. The next breakthrough came when Sarah uncovered a hidden ledger in Collins's office, detailing payments made to multiple individuals, including Father Daniel. The ledger confirmed the extent of Collins's operations and provided the final piece of evidence needed to dismantle his network. "This is it," Michael said, holding the ledger in his hands. "This proves everything." Lisa nodded, her expression resolute. "And it means Claire didn't die in vain." With the ledger in hand, the group prepared for the upcoming trial. Collins and Father Daniel would stand before the court, their actions laid bare for all to see. The baby, now thriving under Lisa's care, symbolized the hope and resilience that had carried them through the darkest of times. "We owe this to Claire," Michael said during a quiet moment with Lisa and Father Daniel. "To finish what she started and make sure no one else suffers the way she did." As the trial approached, the community rallied around Michael. Lisa and the baby. Jack, ever vigilant, remained by their side, his loyalty a testament to the bond he had shared with Claire. The fight for justice was far from over, but for the first time, they felt the weight of their loss begin to lift. Together, they had uncovered the truth, confronted their fears, and found strength in each other. The day of the trial arrived, and the courtroom in Fairhaven was packed with townspeople, journalists, and families who had been touched by the revelations of the past months. Andrew Collins sat at the defendant's table, his face impassive but his eyes betraying fear. Beside him, Father Daniel appeared broken, his head bowed as if under the weight of his guilt. Michael and Lisa sat in the front row, their presence a silent testament to Claire's legacy. Jack rested at Michael's feet, his amber eyes fixed on the proceedings as if he, too, understood the significance of the moment. The prosecution presented a meticulous case, weaving together the evidence Michael, Lisa, and Sarah had uncovered. The ledger, the journal, and the testimonies of witnesses painted a damning picture of Collins's exploitation and Father Daniel's complicity. Michael took the stand, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Claire gave her life to protect that child," he said. "She saw a system that preyed on the vulnerable and chose to stand against it. She was brave, selfless, and willing to risk everything for what was right." When asked about Father Daniel, Michael paused before answering. "He failed her," he said honestly. "But even in his failure, Claire's courage shines brighter. Her actions remind us that we all have the power to do good even when it's hard." Lisa's testimony followed, her voice trembling as she recounted Claire's love for the baby and her unwavering determination to keep them safe. "Claire believed in a better world," Lisa said. "And she taught us to fight for it, no matter the cost." Father Daniel, when called to the stand, gave a tearful confession. "I let fear guide my actions," he admitted, his voice cracking. "I thought silence would protect the church. But all it did was betray the very principles I was meant to uphold. Claire's bravery will haunt me for the rest of my life, and I can only hope to honor her memory by accepting responsibility for my sins." The jury deliberated for hours before returning with their verdict. Collins was found guilty on all charges, including human trafficking, fraud, and conspiracy. Father Daniel, though spared from the harshest penalties due to his cooperation, was sentenced for his role in obstructing justice. For the first time in months, Michael and Lisa felt a sense of closure. Justice had been served, and Claire's sacrifice had not been in vain. In the weeks that followed, the baby, now officially under Lisa's guardianship, became a symbol of hope and renewal for Fairhaven. The community, inspired by Claire's story, rallied around Lisa and the child, offering their support and love. One sunny afternoon, Lisa stood in the garden Claire had once tended, watching as the baby took their first tentative steps. Jack trotted beside them, his tail wagging as he nudged the child forward. "She would have loved this," Michael said, joining Lisa in the garden. "Seeing them grow, thrive. It's everything Claire wanted." Lisa smiled, her eyes glistening with tears. "And it's what we'll fight for every day. To honor her." The group gathered at Claire's grave to reflect on their journey and the woman who had brought them together. Father Daniel, now stripped of his title but working to rebuild his life, joined them. He placed a single white rose on her headstone, his voice heavy with emotion. "Claire," he said softly, "I failed you in life. But I promise to carry your legacy forward. Your courage will not be forgotten." As the sun set over Fairhaven, Michael, Lisa, and the baby walked home with Jack leading the way. The road ahead was uncertain, but they carried with them the strength and resilience Claire had inspired. Michael looked at Jack, who glanced back at him with a soft bark. "You've been her guardian, Jack," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "And now you're ours." Jack wagged his tail, his loyalty unwavering. The story of Claire, the baby, and the brave dog who wouldn't give up became a legend in Fairhaven, a testament to the power of love, sacrifice, and the unyielding fight for justice. And for Michael, Lisa, and the child who had brought them together, it was a legacy they would carry with them forever.